The main impact of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict on the global economy is the rise in energy prices, the weakening of confidence and the decline in financial markets, under the weight of international sanctions against Russia. And if we take into account the weight of the Russian and Ukrainian economies in terms of the value of their transactions with the countries of the world, it becomes clear the size of the losses that will be affected by the two economies, along with the economies of those countries. While Ukraine has limited partnerships with large economies, Russia, in turn, has experience and weight in dealing with the European Union, the United Kingdom, the Latin American countries, and the Asian tigers. For example, Germany, France, and Italy are Russia's leading trading partners, and their imports amount to 3.7% of Russia's GDP. This is in addition to its investments in the Russian energy and technology sectors. Experts warn that the rise in energy prices leads to an escalation of fears of stagflation, as oil prices rose and approached the barrier of $120 per barrel, the highest level since the global financial crisis in 2008, which puts global energy security at risk due to the Ukrainian crisis. Experts are still chasing the cannon strikes to count the accumulated losses as a result of the war. Where do the economic losses go without any hope of a breakthrough soon? The economic impact from the Ukraine war is exacerbating, and may be more evident given Russia's share of global GDP, which was expected to reach 1.6% at the end of 2022, according to the International Monetary Fund. While Ukraine's GDP for the same period was expected to be only 0.2%. It is true that the Russian and Ukrainian economies are limited in size compared to the global economy, but their importance is great in some vital areas, especially energy and food. Accumulated losses bleeding. According to a new study conducted by the Center for Economic Recovery and the consulting company Savita and Easy Business, during the first week of the war, Russia suffered losses of $7 billion. This comes at a time when the International Monetary Fund announced that Ukraine had requested from the Fund for Emergency Financing of $1.4 billion under the Rapid Financing Instrument. According to another recent study issued by the National Institute of Economic and Social Research in Britain, the conflict in Ukraine may reduce the growth rate of global gross domestic product by 1% by 2023, which represents about $1 trillion of the total global product. The model also estimated a rise in global inflation rates by about 3 percentage points in the year 2022 and 2 percentage points in the year 2023. The study expects that the problems of supply chains for consumers of basic goods will worsen with the continuation of the war, including titanium, palladium, and iron, which negatively affects the automotive, smartphone and aircraft industries, as Russia and Ukraine are important suppliers of these goods at the global level. The study also predicts that Europe will be affected more than others, given the trade links with the two countries and the dependence on Russian energy and food supplies, while the impact of the repercussions on emerging markets will be less than that of advanced economies. The study stressed the impact of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict on the prices of food commodities, and daily food, which is bread, as most countries of the world are importers of wheat, corn, and soy, and thus family spending and the citizen's pocket are the most affected, which may threaten social stability in emerging economies. Citizens' bread burns. This was also confirmed by a recent report of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, 2022, which indicated that Russian and Ukrainian wheat exports represent about a quarter of the world total, in addition to corn and fodder exports, which represent a fifth of global exports. To this is added about 80% of the total exports of corn and sunflower oil. The rise in the prices of these basic commodities will lead to more inflationary pressures in the global economy, according to the same report. He points to the possibility of political repercussions in some emerging economies that depend entirely on the import of grain, where food constitutes a high proportion of household spending, and consumers will now have to pay a heavy price for it, as the impact of the conflict between the two largest grain producers has reached the wallet of the ordinary citizen. And his bread that burns with high prices. In developed countries, such as the United States, the proportion of bread in the consumer index is about 2% on average, according to the USDA report, where flour is a relatively small percentage of the cost of a loaf of bread while the cost of production, added ingredients, packaging and advertising is much greater. So it can add 0.1% to inflation. As for emerging markets that import wheat, corn, and soybeans from Russia and Ukraine, they may have a greater impact on the consumer index and inflation numbers, especially taking into account the high cost of energy, transportation, and scarcity of supplies. Russia compensates for its losses. As for Russia, the British Institute study says that it will try to mitigate the economic stagnation by compensating for its losses resulting from international sanctions imposed on it thanks to the high prices of gas and oil exports. But the final outcome of the Russian economy will certainly be negative, as the Russian gross domestic product is expected to contract by 1.5% this year, and more than 2.5% by the end of 2023. The Russian inflation rate is likely to rise to more than 20% this year in light of the collapsed ruble exchange rate. Although Russia is the biggest economic loser in the long run of the conflict, especially if the difficulties are escalated to the point of stopping oil and gas shipments, Western countries, especially European countries, will not be spared the repercussions in turn, as inflation continues to rise also with the increasing risks of recession. Many observers in European think tanks direct detailed observations to policy makers in the context of self-criticism and policy reassessment. In the forefront of these observations is that Europe has done little in recent years to reduce its dependence on Russian gas, especially Germany, whose problem will be exacerbated by the lack of gas, because it has abandoned nuclear energy. Therefore, those oil-importing countries will face headwinds from waves of price hikes. The United States, on the other hand, is more prudent, since its oil production is equal to its consumption, especially since its more expensive oil is roughly out of GDP. But higher oil prices will hurt American consumers while only helping a limited segment of companies and workers associated with the oil and gas industry. Higher prices will also increase inflation, which is already at its highest levels in over a decade in the US and other advanced economies. Although the price of a barrel of oil approached the $120 barrier, futures prices are lower than spot prices, which indicates that the market may expect this increase to be temporary. Thus, the ongoing war is exacerbating the dilemma facing monetary policy makers because it will add to inflation, weaken growth, and harm consumer confidence and investments that have already been undermined by the price increases caused by the corona pandemic. Increasing the security and relief budget. On the other hand, it is expected to increase public spending to enhance security measures and support relief activities in the face of the massive influx of asylum seekers from Ukraine, which increases pressure on resources, and thus inflation. A United Nations official announced that the first week of the conflict led to the flight of more than 50,000 Ukrainians to countries such as Poland and Moldova, and there are about 3 million others in need of food and other necessities. While the International Monetary Fund, in a statement issued by its executive board meeting, estimated a wave of refugees of more than 1 million refugees to neighboring countries. In addition, defense budgets in Europe, the United States and some other countries are likely to rise to reflect the increasingly precarious global situation. Not only will this reduce GDP growth, but it will reduce citizens' well-being, because the resources devoted to defense are resources that cannot be directed towards consumption and investment in education, healthcare, and infrastructure. The longer the war continues, the worse the consequences for the global economy will be. If the United States, the European Union and other governments relied on the option of sanctions, Russia responded.